Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, David Oxenford is an attorney, and he's our guest, talking about how the Supreme Court's decision about Chevron deference can affect broadcasters, broadcast engineers, and broadcast owners. That's coming up. Larry Fuss is here, too, to talk about some kind of annoying rules from the FCC, and Chris Tarr is here, as always, to, lend some credibility to the whole discussion. It's coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store, with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics, with the Bionic Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. By Nautel, worry-free transmission you can count on with outstanding control, reliability, efficiencies, and Nautel's unmatched 24/7 customer support. Online at nautel.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to the light bulb at the top of the tower. Hey, I'm Kirk Harnack. So glad that you could join us. We have a pretty interesting show today. A little bit of a highfalutin show. We got a guest on here who's an attorney, and he's going to explain some things that are very attorney-ish, but we as engineers probably ought to be aware of and understand. Our guest coming up is David Oxenford. I will tell you the interview is pre-recorded. I talked to David just a couple days ago, and was really impressed with what Mr. Oxenford had to say. I'm at the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee, my usual spot where it's hot outside, 92 degrees here in Nashville, and you could cut the air with a butter knife. It's so thick with moisture. But it's not like that in Mukwonago, Wisconsin, where Chris Tarr is. Chris, welcome in.
Actually,
good to see you, man.
It kind of is, actually. It's just about 80 and humidity's about 70%, 80%. It's pretty thick out here too. So there you go. Well, good to be here.
Good to see you. So I see you're back in the home office, so you're not on the road today.
I was on the road earlier today. I got back in time for this. But yeah, I've been once again put a new translator on Monday, and was it Monday? Yeah, Monday. Put a new transmitter in on Sunday at a different site, and then today working on a transmitter in Racine. So been busy.
Have you, I really haven't kept up. You've got close to 50 transmitters, I believe, in your group, Magnum Media. Are you on like a replacement cycle basis, or are you adding even more stations at this point?
Well, both. I just recently, we're in the process right now of swapping out all of our tube transmitters for solid state. So we've got that going on. That was one of the transmitters I did Sunday. And then we still have, actually, I think this translator was the last signal to put on the air that we have. And then we're done with that, which puts us up over, so it's pretty close to 50. So we've got 23, 24 full power stations, and then another probably close to 20 translators. So, busy.
We should do a show, and maybe we've kind of touched on this topic, but we should do a show coming up on, since you've done so many tube to solid state replacements, we should do a show coming up on what are the key things to think about when you're doing that. What are the key things that change when you do that? So many transmitter sites with tube transmitters have blow through air through the building. And that really can change when you get a solid state. But I'd like to know maybe at times that it doesn't change, or when it absolutely needs to change. And, and there's other considerations as well. I'm sure grounding and maybe a solid state is more sensitive in some ways. So
something that people always overlook is the usually a tube type transmitter has a low pass filter, and that goes away, which means you've got to have a new section of line to make up for that low pass filter going away. That was one actually that I've run into before. Not this time, but
I've had it on order for years now. It's been back ordered. I have an Andrew line stretcher that is hasn't been delivered yet.
All of a sudden you start with 3-inch line. You have like 10 feet of 3-inch line or 300 feet of half-inch once you're
It's
done.
yeah, half-inch light. That's right. Well, I ordered since Andrew wasn't delivering, I ordered one from Temu. We'll see what happens.
Well, that
All
should take
right.
another 10 years to get to you.
Well, Chris, you've done a lot of this kind of work. I've done a little bit of it. The guy who's written the checks for changing tube transmitters to solid state is here with us as well. That's Larry Fuss. Larry, good to see you. Welcome into This Week in Radio Tech.
Hey, it's 104 in Las Vegas today.
Holy moly! Jiminy Christmas. Is your air conditioner keeping up?
Yeah, but it's a dry heat, you know.
So is your oven, right?
Pizza oven.
Oh, man. Well, Larry, give us a quick comment about about changing from tube transmitters to solid state, because you have written checks and paid for and instigated at the stations that we own together. You've instigated a lot of that. So what are your thoughts about that switchover?
I think of all the stations that we have on the air now, only 2 of them have tube-type transmitters. Everything else is solid state. And I guess we started moving to solid state, 20-something years ago? And that seems to be the way to do it nowadays. First of all, the electric bill's a lot less.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah.
But we do have air conditioning, and that's becomes we can't do without air conditioning at these sites that have a solid state transmitter.
I think we have air conditioning now at all of our sites. At one time, we tried to use just forced air, and the room stayed warm, but the transmitter was okay with it. Solid state transmitters aren't nearly as forgiving as tube type transmitters. They want to be cool.
Yeah, they do. They do. So, gentlemen, our topic today, it centers around this topic of, it's been in the news, the Supreme Court decision on something called Chevron Deference, also called the Chevron Doctrine. And I'm not going to try to explain it, because David Oxenford, our first guest, does a great job of explaining that. And it has some implications across many, many different industries and areas of federal regulation, from the EPA to the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and many other agencies as well. It doesn't, as David Oxenford will explain, it doesn't instantly change rules at all. There's no automatic rule changes because of this Supreme Court decision. But what there is a little difference in what the courts can consider when they're deciding in the case of a lawsuit. Typically, a lawsuit brought by someone who is regulated by a federal agency, brought against that federal agency. So we'll ask David about that, and he's got a follow-up comment that he sent me after the interview. I'll mention that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We'll follow on after David Oxenford's topic of how Chevron deference changes, and he's going to talk about it with regard to the FCC. So that because he's a communications law attorney. We're also going to talk about some of the rules that we as broadcasters have to follow, and some that we may think are good and worthwhile, and others that we really wish we have no interest in the FCC getting involved in that kind of ruling or rulemaking. So that's what's coming up. I think it's going to be interesting, but we're going to hear from David Oxenford in just a minute, as I interviewed him a couple days ago. Hey, we'll start out the show with a quick word from Nautel, and Nautel, terrific sponsor of This Week in Radio Tech, of course, maker of solid state transmitters that we were talking about. They've announced, and you've heard it before here, but I got to remind you, this HD digital radio test drive. The test drive is an offering intended to break down these barriers, keeping many broadcasters from trying HD radio. HD radio transmission has the potential, as we've known for years now, and it is becoming more popular, to create critical presence on the car dashboard right now when it's needed, when some car manufacturers are talking about making it harder to find AM and FM, or even impossible to find AM, and help stations stay competitive in that field of alternative media choices. Now, this is based on Nautel's really innovative software-based air chain. Larry Fuss and I are using that software-based air chain at stations in Oxford, Mississippi that are now HD. The test drive allows broadcasters to try HD radio transmission in their market for up to 6 months to unlock listeners and content and new revenue potential without having to install and purchase upwards of $40,000 or $50,000 of HD gear. So, an easy, minimal cost option. And here's how it goes. You can experiment with new formats, maybe different languages if you've got maybe a large Hispanic or other language population in your coverage area, or even short-term pop-up event stations, like March Madness stations, or maybe extra high school football that's coming up. You could be ready just in time for that. You can see the impact on listener retention and engagement when album art or graphics are displayed on the auto dashboard. And you can counter competing alternate media. I think you know what we're all talking about there. So here's what you need to get started. You can lease or purchase a Nautel GV2 transmitter, or if you have a Nautel GV transmitter already, you can upgrade that to a GV2. You'll also need an Xperi main station or equivalent license and a signed trial agreement with Nautel. And then you need some content from 1 to 4 channels of content delivered via Livewire or via AES67 to your transmitter. And you plug that in the Nautel transmitter, and it takes care of the rest, including the audio processing and the album art and just all that stuff. So check it out. Contact your Nautel representative, Jeff Welton, for a whole lot of you, or contact Nautel. Go to nautel.com and check it out there. Thanks, Nautel, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, let's gentlemen, let's stand by. Pay attention to David Oxenford here as we roll this tape. We're back. It's This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host, and our guest coming up is David Oxenford. He is an attorney who specializes in some telecom law. You may have seen or met David at an industry function, or maybe hired his law firm to represent you. Last month, the Supreme Court overruled something called Chevron doctrine, or Chevron deference, a principle established back in 1984, I should say, that allowed courts to defer to administrative agencies like the FCC in interpreting ambiguous statutes. That is, laws passed by Congress. If there was some ambiguity there, well, the agency administering that law got to interpret it, as long as that interpretation was not arbitrary or, in fact, illegal. And this means that courts can use their independence in their judgment to determine if an agency has acted within its legal boundaries, eliminating the practice of deference when a statute is ambiguous. Okay, a lot of big words there for a non-lawyer like me, but thankfully we have David Oxenford here. David, welcome in. It's great to see you. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
So I hope that was somewhat accurate. It just changes the legal landscape a bit about the latitude that agencies have in interpreting federal law and how they apply that. And you hear cases about the EPA or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, and maybe the FCC about how they interpret congressional mandates, and maybe sometimes we think that the FCC is a bit of overreach. Kind of set the stage for us on what Chevron deference and the elimination of that means for us as broadcasters.
Sure. I think a lot of the words that you used are big lawyer words and are words that we here in Washington think about a lot. But in terms of the practical impact of this case, I think in many situations it's been overestimated. I think a lot of people are thinking, all these rules that the FCC has imposed are going to be thrown out, or rules that other government agencies have imposed over the years will be thrown out. And in fact, it just changes the standard of review that a court gives to an agency decision. And it only changes that standard of review in looking at the agency's interpretation of laws passed by Congress. It doesn't overturn the deference that's given to an agency when the agency makes a policy decision where they've been directly told by Congress to make a policy decision on a particular issue. It doesn't overturn the deference given to fact finding when Congress has told a government agency to go out and figure out what the story is in this particular area and adopt rules in that particular area. In those circumstances, it's not going to make that much difference. And in fact, even in interpreting ambiguous statutes, as you talked about, it's going to make some difference because courts have more latitude to just say, hey, that's not the right decision when the FCC or another government agency makes a decision. But practically speaking, they've been throwing out FCC decisions and decisions from other government agencies all the time. Even when Chevron was in place, it just gives the courts a little bit more ability to just disregard what the agency has said or disagree completely with what the agency has said, rather than at least looking hard at what the agency said and kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt, which is what Chevron required.
It almost seems like I don't know if you play Monopoly with family or not, but when you play Monopoly with different people, some people when you land on I forget if it's parking or jail or whatever, some people have a kitty in the middle, and if you land there, you get the kitty, and that's not in the rules.
That's the way I play all the time.
Exactly, that's the way a lot of people play. So it seems, but does it affect the whole gameplay? Probably not, but does it affect your joy or your position at a particular given time? It almost sounds like the elimination of Chevron deference just can make a small but significant for those whom it affects, but could make a small change in the rules when the courts get involved.
Let me give you a couple of FCC examples.
Yeah,
one of them on the TV side was with loud commercials, the COM Act that was passed almost 10 years ago by Congress, basically telling the FCC to figure out a way to make sure that commercials in TV programming weren't louder than the surrounding programming. Congress gave the FCC the authority to figure out how loud is a commercial or how to determine when a commercial is too loud, and gave them specifically the authority to adopt some rules to make sure that commercials weren't too loud. Hey, FCC's been given the authority. They've been given the authority to make policy. They've given the authority to find facts. In that case, it's not going to make any difference when they enforce somebody for a COM Act violation, which luckily they haven't done in the 10 years that the rule's been in effect. But they've got clear authority to go ahead and do that. An area where it's more ambiguous and probably where there will be issues, a couple areas are pending before the courts right now. One is in the area of the broadcast ownership rules. Congress very clearly told the FCC to every 4 years look at the local ownership rules. How many stations, radio stations or TV stations can one party own in a particular market, and decide whether those rules were still in the public interest based on competition. Now, the FCC is over the last couple of years looked at all sorts of factors, looked at the impact on minority ownership, looked at the impact on new entrants into the broadcast ownership, looked at the effect of competition between broadcasters, but not really looked at competition with digital media companies, even though there's lots of legislative history that was what Congress's intent would be. That's a question that's right now being raised before the courts as to whether the FCC's decision to not change the local ownership rules, to liberalize the radio ownership rules, or to actually tighten the TV local ownership rules that was released 2 days after Christmas this year, whether that decision was properly made. That's before the courts right now. In fact, we're representing a number of radio broadcasters who are challenging those rules. And very clearly, the question of what is the proper interpretation of the statute that directs the commission to review those rules based on competition. What's the proper interpretation of that? And this case throwing out Chevron deference is all over the briefs that were filed last week, and the FCC files its reply briefs in September, and will probably be trying to explain why its explanation of what the statute should be is the proper one. Another area where I think that's going to come up is the readoption of FCC Form 395B. That's the EEO form that requires all broadcasters to categorize their employees by race, gender, and ethnicity, and by various job categories, and file an annual report putting all their employees into these various categories. That's also being appealed right now, arguing that the commission really doesn't have any authority to adopt this annual EEO report, that they're not going to use for any sort of enforcement purpose. There's some vague reference to it in a couple of budget bills that fund the FCC to at least collecting information for determining what the employment profile of the broadcast industry is. But does it give them the right to go out and adopt these rules? I think that's going to be a central question there. The proposal that just came out last week about requiring sponsorship identification not sponsorship identification, but disclaimers on political advertising that uses AI in the production. There's been a real dispute even before that notice of proposed rulemaking was released last week about whether the FCC's got authority to adopt those sorts of rules, to require disclaimers on political advertising about the use of AI. It's not in the statute. The FCC's got the requirement to enforce equal opportunities, to do lowest unit rates, to get sponsorship identification on those political ads, to put certain information about those political ads in the public inspection file. But none of those rules say anything about identifying artificial intelligence or, identifying false ads in any way. That's just never been part of the FCC's mandate to figure out which ads are false or arguably false based on the computer technology that they're using to produce those ads. And I'm sure that the lack of Chevron deference will be used to challenge the FCC's authority in that area, which they've justified just based on their broad public interest mandate. And whenever you've got a broad public interest mandate, not just at the FCC but at any agency, you're going to have decisions that are based on those broad public interest mandates being challenged on appeal. For another government agency, a decision that does affect broadcasters is the recent FTC decision, the Federal Trade Commission decision that goes into effect on September 4th to abolish non-compete agreements in employment agreements throughout the country. Basically, you can't sign a non-compete agreement with your evening news host or your morning disc jockey that says if they leave your employment, they can't go across the street and start competing with you anymore. The FTC said those are no longer permissible in any employment situation in the United States. And that's, again, based on their broad authority to regulate unfair trade practices. That's clearly being challenged in the courts right now. In fact, one court in Texas already said it's beyond the mandate that Congress has given them, although a court in Pennsylvania found just the opposite. So we're going to see a lot of these fights among courts trying to determine what Congress really meant by these statutes, fights that probably were less frequently happening when deference was given to the agency decision as to what the laws meant.
Wow, David, I'm getting a much clearer picture here of how this putting down Chevron deference applies. And I really appreciate your time. We're talking to David Oxenford. He's an attorney. David, tell me the name of your firm.
Yeah, the firm is Wilkinson, Barker, and Nauer. We're in Washington, D.C., also have offices in Denver and Austin.
We will put links to your firm in the show notes. I've got a follow-up question here that just to me made perfect sense to ask, and that is, well, would this change in Chevron deference, wouldn't this encourage Congress, when it writes laws, to be more specific about what they write and not leave some things open for interpretation? What do you think about that notion?
One would hope. Maybe, for a lawyer, that's a short answer, but one would hope. The problem is that there's so much going on in Congress. Congress people are dealing with a zillion different issues. And today's economy, these issues are incredibly complex. And so it's really easy for Congress to set broad policy goals and then leave it to administrative agencies to fill in the details. It's really hard for Congress to sit down and master the policy issues in communications, in copyright, in employment law, and all these other areas that Congress deals with, in taxation. That's why they have administrative agencies. That's why they defer to administrative agencies to make rules, is because it's just so complicated for Congress to try to become the authority on any of these issues. It's very, very hard. And so Congress, to get into the weeds, to write the kind of specific laws that avoids these issues, we can wish for it, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
I can see even further stepped up efforts for lobbyists to be involved with writing laws. We have that now, but can you imagine now that maybe the importance of that to the lobbyists and the people that they represent is even greater now than ever before?
And that's important all the time. You see little provisions thrown into laws that are very meaningful for just a couple of companies, and that'll become even more important now that the courts have even more authority to overturn agency decisions. They'll be looking at what it says in the statute.
We're talking to David Oxenford. David, if you'll hang with us through the commercial break, I've got a few rapid fire questions. I think I can guess your answer to some of these, which is going to be no difference. But
happy to take them.
We've got a couple more telecom questions coming up. I'm Kirk Harnack. It's This Week in Radio Tech. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more from David Oxenford about the elimination of Chevron deference.
Welcome to the Bionic Studio. The Bionic Studio brings all audience interaction to the fingertips of a production team in radio, TV, and podcast. Our workflow-led system is working 24/7 around the world for small broadcasters and national and international networks. Our telephony module, Bionic Talk Show, allows cost-effective centralization, remote operation, scalability, and resilience across an entire network of stations, but at the same time is used in single-studio self-op environments. Social media curation and activity is now considered a broadcast-critical part of programming. Bionic Social means the studio isn't overwhelmed with a wall of interaction from an ever-growing number of social platforms. We combine SMS, MMS, and email together with a speech-to-text service for listeners using smart speakers. We enable studio teams to curate, filter, and display all platforms in one place, and post text, images, and video content to multiple platforms in one operation. Effortless collection of video content with Bionic Director has helped position some of the world's most successful stations as leaders in viral content, generating appointments to listen and free marketing via retweets and shares. Bionic Contest enables end-to-end tracking of on-air competitions, live reads, and prizes. These can be on-air contests, automated SMS entry, or online. Anywhere, and Skype TX for Radio brings high-quality audio and video contribution into the studio with ease. No need for dedicated PCs to run different applications. Everything is controlled within the Bionic Studio UI, and incoming connections are visible to users along with all other platforms. Our codec integration enables connection, algorithm configuration, and directory to a wide range of IP and ISDN codecs. The Bionic Studio, a unique suite of products designed to enable your talent to work smarter.
We're back at This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, and our guest today on this segment is David Oxenford. He is an attorney in the telecom law area. Speaking of telecom law, David, you have a blog that a lot of people read. Tell me what that is exactly.
Yeah, it's the Broadcast Law blog. Very simple to find, broadcastlawblog.com. And in fact, I did an article on the Chevron Deference issue in the Supreme Court case a couple weeks ago when it came out.
Actually, in my research for talking to you, I did run across that. So thank you very much. It shows up in search results, as it should.
Yep.
And we'll have that listed in the show notes, folks. So if you want to find broadcastlawblog.com, you can find it in the show notes as well if you can't remember it right now, or if you're driving and don't want to write it down. Hey, we've got just a couple more questions I wanted to hit. Bam, real quick with David here regarding changes that may occur or maybe are expected to occur or not occur due to the change in the Chevron deference doctrine. The FCC's open internet order or net neutrality, David, what's going to happen with that?
I'm sure the courts will look at it very closely. That's an issue of exactly what power the FCC has to regulate in this area has been fought over for close to a decade in the context of net neutrality, and I'm sure it'll be fought over in appeals of recent FCC decisions in that area as well.
All right. What about something that we've all paid money into? That's the Universal Service Program. It's been on our traditional telephone bills now for as long as I can remember. Does the FCC have the right to do this? Is someone going to challenge it?
And that was just actually, there was a court case last week that said the FCC's authority in that area was not as broad as the FCC had thought it was. A decision that was contrary to a number of court decisions in the past. We're going to see that fought out in the courts too, as that decision is appealed. And, I think that's where we're going to see a lot more clarity as to exactly what the repeal of Chevron means will come from new court decisions, because we'll see different courts having different interpretations of what a statute really means, because ambiguous statutes are by their nature ambiguous, and they can be read different ways by different peoples, courts included. So we're going to see lots of fighting about what the Supreme Court decision abolishing Chevron really means. We're going to see lots of court decisions fighting about what the proper interpretation of a particular congressional statute is, where that statute is ambiguous. So good time for lawyers, I think.
Yes, indeed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It gives income. Lawyers serve a fantastic purpose on this earth, despite the trouble that we give them and the jokes that occur. Hey, you mentioned ownership caps are going to be ripe for review. Overall, do you think this change in Chevron deference will result in more regulation of the broadcast industry, or less regulation, or just different? Can you broad brush it?
I think it will result. I mean, there's already challenges to pretty much any controversial legislation or any controversial regulation that comes out of the FCC. So I don't see that changing. There's already a lot of FCC rules that get overturned on appeal. Perhaps there'll be some more, but it's always a bit of a crapshoot on appeals as to whether or not you can convince a court to overturn an FCC regulation. I think regulation depends much more on who the regulators are than what the court is going to ultimately say about that regulation that's adopted. A lot of regulation comes not from big rulemaking policy decisions based on congressional statutes, but comes from interpretations from the Media Bureau as to how to enforce a particular rule that's already on the books, or where an enforcement priorities are highlighted in a particular FCC administration. I think that really is going to make a lot more difference as to whether we see more regulation or not, who the people are making those regulations, not how the courts will ultimately decide when a regulation is appealed. I mean, we've seen that, from both Democratic and Republican sides. The current FCC seems to be very regulatory, particularly on broadcasters, for quite a few years. Even in the Obama administration, they were too caught up in broadband issues to really do a lot in the broadcast area. One of President Bush's FCC commissioners was very regulatory on the broadcast industry. So you just never know. It depends on the personalities of the folks that are making those regulations at the FCC.
Gotcha. When this was first announced, I think there was a lot of people who were hopeful of things just happening automatically. That rules that apply to them no longer apply to them because they thought they were arbitrary and capricious. And I don't think that's true at all. Nothing really happens automatically because of this ruling, right?
Nothing happens automatically. Court appeals, unfortunately, take forever. I mean, you're looking at a 1.5 to 2 year process in many cases. So, and then there's appeals often of those decisions. So, don't look for overnight changes in FCC regulations or regulations from any other government agency based on this decision.
All right. These are all the questions. These are all the questions that I have. David, is there anything that we haven't touched on in this area that you think that we should? Any prognostications for the future, or things that people, broadcast owners, should be careful about, or when should they give your firm a call to represent them on a topic?
Well, anytime. Always willing to take those calls. But I think the one other question to think about is just that there's so much we don't know right now. The Supreme Court, in adopting this decision, getting rid of Chevron deference, says we're not overturning rules that were upheld based on Chevron deference in the past. But they didn't say that if somebody is appealing the enforcement of one of those rules against them, whether that they can challenge the basis for that rule at that point. And those are questions that are all going to be decided by future court cases. So this is going to play out over the next couple of years. We're not going to see overnight changes in regulation. This is a slow-moving process that we'll all just have to follow very closely and see how it impacts broadcast regulation over the next couple of years.
Good deal. David Oxenford, thank you for your helpful opinions and giving some clarity to this topic, and maybe calming some people down who had a lot of flutters about it, good or bad. If people want to read your blog, what you have to say, you publish this, what, weekly, monthly, how often?
Oh, yeah. We weekly do a summary of what happened the previous week in regulation. For broadcasters, we monthly publish what to look forward to in regulation in the next month. And then in the rest of the week, we once, twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week, we'll drill down on specific topics. So take a look at the blog if you haven't already read it, broadcastlawblog.com.
All righty. Well, we will put that in the show notes and encourage people to go read that. That's good reading for certainly any station owner, manager, and probably occasionally broadcast engineers will find something interesting there.
The FCC reads it all the time. I've been publishing it for 25 years, so it's been around a long time. And lots of people read it.
Did it used to be on paper and mailed out, or it's always been online?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. David Oxenford, thank you so much for being with us. We sure have enjoyed your presence here, and you add a touch of class to our normally questionable program here this week in Radio Tech. David Oxenford has been our guest, and we'll be right back after this on This Week in Radio Tech.
About Angry Audio, my favorite group of people. And I just saw online that the Rave is starting to ship out, and people are excitedly posting their pictures. I saw the first one to get delivered popped up online. Why are people raving about the Rave? Well, let me tell you why they're raving about the Rave. The Rave is a fantastic console that does all of those things that more expensive consoles do, but at a better price. And they look fantastic. And they have these great, really good additions like things like output mix buses, preview on every channel, switchable between mic and line on the mic inputs, monitor selectors with talkback, headphone amplifier, monitoring section, mix minus, all of those things. That's just scratching the surface on what these things can do. This is basically like a full powered, large studio console in a small form factor. Not only that, but more affordable than a lot of other consoles its size. And of course, it has the Angry Audio touch with it, with the transformers and the microphone amplifiers and things like that. All low noise, all really, really nice looking, and all really high performance. Powder coated steel chassis, laser etched markings on it, premium components, even little touches like the control room speaker output, which will mute when you turn the microphones on. Things you don't find in your standard Mac keyboard or whatever. All of those things show up here in this particular mixer. This is why people are raving about the Rave, whether maybe you're doing podcasting, or you have a production studio, or even in an on-air studio. If you just have, you're kind of bringing things down a little bit, make them a little bit smaller, maybe downsizing, and you've got a small station that needs just a really nice, and I don't even want to say budget console, because this is a full-featured console with full-featured specifications, but at a great price. So if you're looking for a really nice entry-level, durable, rugged console that checks all the boxes, take a look at it, angryaudio.com. It is the Rave. Angryaudio.com. Check them out. You can also contact your favorite broadcast dealer and get more information on it. But so far, people are raving about the Rave. So go and check it out, angryaudio.com, for more information.
This is why I love having Chris Tarr do the commercial for the Rave, because it's full featured, just like Chris Tarr. How about that? From one full feature to another. It's the Rave console.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, another sponsor is Max Connect. Max Connect and their new product, the U.192. This is their multiplex USB sound card. Now, why would you need this? You never needed one before, but now you might. More and more people are interested in their FM audio processing running on a PC, on typically a Windows PC. And Stereo Tool, for example, is a popular one, but there's also Breakaway One, and there's also Omnia SST that are available that will output a multiplex signal out their USB. But what do you do with it then? Well, you can use, there are a couple of hard to get internal sound cards that kind of sort of work, but they're not designed to give you a quality multiplex output. But the U192 is. It's designed exactly to do this, to give you the high quality multiplex output that you need from your PC-based FM processor. This has a lot of features in it, like the stereo analog inputs and outputs on Studio Hub RJ45 connectors. Those are capable of the high plus 24 dBu inputs and outputs. The high performance audio to digital converter, or the digital audio converters, those deliver over 112 dB of dynamic range. There's also digital AES-EBU inputs and outputs. The input can handle any typical sample rate from 32 kilohertz to 192 kilohertz. The output, however, because it's a multiplex output, it's fixed at 192 kilohertz. It has analog MPX, or those composite outputs for FM on BNC connectors. So you can use that to feed your analog FM exciter input on BNC, or if you have an STL, maybe you have a 950 megahertz STL system, you can feed that with it. And that's how you get this FM processed audio into your STL system. Either way will work fine. Front panel switches, select analog or digital input. The front panel LEDs, you can see at a glance that the outputs are active. Has a built-in AC/DC power supply, no wall wart involved, powder-coated steel enclosure, and it connects to your PC using a standard USB cable. And this thing is super high quality. It does not depend on the PC for power. This thing, you want high quality power supply, and it's got that built in. It's the Max Connect Broadcast U192 MPX USB sound card. That is a mouthful, but boy, it does a lot of good stuff. Does exactly what you need for a PC-based FM audio processor. Thanks a lot, Max Connect. MaxConnect.com. We'll have a link in the show notes. All right. Hey, I want to update my interview with David Oxenford. He sent me a statement that he wanted to make sure got across. He said, this is quoting David now, I realized there was one qualification that I should have made when I said that no change in FCC rules or those of most other agencies will be quick because most court cases take as much as 2 years to play out. David says he should have been pointed out that there is one exception to that, and that is in challenges to new rules. In those cases where an agency is adding a new regulation, like the FCC's proposal to bring back Form 395B that has not been in effect in over 20 years, or where the FCC or were the FCC to adopt the rules that it just proposed requiring disclaimers on the use of AI in political ads, a court decision could come quickly in the form of a stay or an injunction against the rule going into effect, just like the challenges to the FTC rule passed in March that go into effect in September regarding non-compete agreements, making those illegal. We could see a court ruling quickly, at least quickly by judicial standards, within 6 months, putting new rules on hold. So it is challenges to request to change existing rules, like the current proceeding to change the local broadcast ownership rules, that could take more than a year, closer to 2 years in some cases, and even more if there are appeals. So David wanted to make sure that we knew about that if it was a new rule proposal, which rolls us right into a couple of topics. And first, I like to mention this AI used in political ads. And of course, that could be used to very detrimental, misleading effect if somebody, were to do that, and the FCC wants to make it clear that either you can't do that or you have to disclose it. So maybe we can get some thoughts on that. Larry Fuss, you and I have a couple of stations together that are using AI voices for disc jockeys. And so far we've been reasonably happy with that situation. It isn't perfect, but it's good. So what are your thoughts about this AI and political ads?
Well, for years, politicians have been taking audio from their competitors and taking them out of context and editing them and using them in their own commercials. And so in this case, I guess they're afraid that somebody's going to take AI and make somebody say what they didn't intend to say. But they can pretty much do that already with digital editing. They can take the guy's real voice and chop it up and make him make a statement that he didn't really make. But introducing AI into the mix does make things more complicated. But does the FCC really have the authority to regulate that?
Yeah, I don't know. Chris Tarr, you hear a lot of ads on the radio with the stations that you work with. You have any thoughts on AI and political ads?
Well, I same thing as everybody else has said so far. The FCC, I don't believe at the moment has any authority to regulate that. Somebody should. The question is, who should be regulating that? Is that an FCC thing? Is that an FTC thing? Because it is advertising, so it could be regulated that way. But then, how do you prevent it from getting on the air if there's no teeth with that? So, there are some things there that are kind of, they're nuanced with this particular situation. It's obviously a problem. We all know that. We all know that it could be abused. The question is, where is who is the responsible party for this? Is it the people buying the ads, producing the ads? Is it the stations that run it? Are they simply the gatekeeper? So there's a lot of good questions that come up with that.
In political ads, it's long been known that putting your opponent down or putting your opponent in a bad light is often the most effective kind of political ads. So the consultants say. And I hadn't thought about what Larry brought up, which is absolutely true. There's all kinds of clips that are used, and I don't know if I've heard clips that just blatantly misrepresent what a person said, but there certainly are ones that subtly can misrepresent what a person said, or at least in a nuanced way. Hey, wait a minute, I said that, but there was a lot more context there that you didn't include. And so I don't know how and where you regulate that. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Larry, you can fill me in, but I think that a local station that the ads are being bought on, that station has no say about the content of the ad. Isn't that right?
Right. You cannot censor or basically do anything with political ads. You're required to run them as is. Even if the guy's making blatant accusations against his opponent, you can't do anything about it.
You the radio station, can't. Yeah.
You, the radio station, can't do anything about it. Correct.
Now, what about there is a what would address this? We hear on so many political ads, I approve this message. And that's typically the candidate, him or herself, saying, I approve this message. Are there cases where an ad can run for a candidate where the candidate doesn't have to approve the message?
I guess anything placed by some committee wouldn't necessarily have to be approved by the candidate. But there's the rule, though, regarding the lowest unit rate. To qualify for the lowest unit rate, the candidate's voice has to be on the spot at some point, even if all they do is say, I approve this message.
Interesting.
So if they leave that out, if their voice is not on there, they don't qualify for the lowest unit rate.
Do the rules or the practices that apply in broadcast, are they applicable in other forms of advertising, magazine or newspaper or billboard? Do people follow any de facto standards? Or like if I buy a billboard, I can absolutely do whatever I want, or do I have to put a disclaimer about who paid for it?
I'm really not sure. I don't think there's a disclaimer requirement for non-broadcast ads. I could be wrong.
Gotcha. Chris, I'm sorry. Were you about to say something, Chris?
No, I was working on, I had a phone call here.
Okay.
No, one of the things I did want to mention was, 1 second here. There we go. Is that, there we go. Is that I know that, for example, political action committees can buy advertising time. They can't buy it on behalf of a candidate. They can't coordinate with the candidate. So there's a situation where you could hear a political ad without any kind of candidate voice or anything else on there. So, but and again, that's the nuanced question is, okay, let's say, there is an ad that breaks the rules. What can you do as the licensee of the radio station? Because you can't turn it down, yet it might break various rules. So, hopefully, with the discussions about AI, that kind of opens up the broader discussion, because ultimately, I believe that there should be standards there. I don't know what they should be, but there should be the ability for a licensee to go, okay, that is not, does this check all the boxes? Is there something in there? Should we run an ad that is blatantly untrue? But then what is blatantly untrue? There's really no good answer to that, because again, when one person's truth is another person's not truth. So, you don't want to be the gatekeeper, I guess, of determining what's good and what's bad. But what happens, if there is an ad that's just blatantly, libelous or whatever, what is the station's responsibility or liability in that case? I guess for now, because they can't do anything, they're not liable for it.
Larry, wouldn't that be true, that the station has no liability for statements made in a political ad?
If it's an ad from the candidate, I believe that's true. If it's a political action committee ad, I do believe that we can refuse to air it or insist on a revision or whatever. But if it's the candidate, we cannot. I could be wrong, but I think that's my understanding.
What about ads for political activity or positions? Like if you had an ad that was either pro-choice or anti-abortion, could a station refuse to play that? Because that's not a candidate running for something. That's an advocacy position.
Right. I don't believe you're required to run the advocacy ads. However, if you do run them, you're also required to run the opposing side as well. For example, an abortion ad, if you ran a pro-abortion ad, you would also have to accept an ad from the Right to Life crowd as well. You can't take sides.
Gotcha. Interesting. Wow. What's sticky? But I guess
I work with some
go ahead.
stations that just don't even. I have some stations that, although it's walking away from a lot of money, that just don't even do political ads. They're like, we don't take any of them.
Yeah.
To get around some of this stuff, because it can be a minefield. And then not only that, but we all know how divisive politics are today. You've got half your listeners disagreeing and half your listeners agreeing and getting mad because they think that you're promoting a certain candidate or a certain position. They don't understand the rules that if you accept one, you open that gate and you accept them all. So, that can be another whole difficult thing to deal with.
Larry has an interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Larry.
I don't know that you can refuse to sell advertising to a qualified federal candidate. Like, you could refuse to sell advertising to the dog catcher, but if you take an ad for the dog catcher, then you also have to run ads for his opponent. But for federal cases, I think you're required to run them.
Really? I wasn't aware of that. I something new. I guess that would. I was always under the impression that if you didn't take any, you could turn them all away. But I don't know. That's the federal thing's a different animal than what I'm used to dealing with.
I could be wrong. I mean, I'm no expert. I'm an old fat guy with a lot of opinions.
Larry
you take the checks, though.
Larry likes to cash the checks. Larry has a pretty interesting perspective on a practice that comes about. We here on the mainland in the United States or in Hawaii or in Alaska, we're pretty used to the political landscape that we deal with. But in American Samoa, the political advertising landscape is a little wacky. Larry, can you kind of tell us what that's like in American Samoa?
Well, it's kind of like a blood sport. They take their elections seriously, and we make a lot of money on the radio stations every time there's political races going on, because what usually happens is somebody running for some office will start running an ad, and his competitor will hear it. And so he has to have an ad that responds to the other guy's ad. And then the other guy decides he wants to change his ad to respond to that guy's ad. And it's very, and he buys more in the process. It's very time consuming, but it does make us a lot of money on political races.
What about ads in Samoa that are not 30 or 60 seconds long? People want to talk longer than that, don't they?
Well, it takes about twice as long to say something in Samoan as it does to say it in English. And that's true. And on our main station there, which is Hot AC, we only run 30s and 60s. But a lot of the candidates, they want to buy 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour. And we do that on some of our other stations, on our Samoan language station especially, but we don't do it on our music-intensive Hot AC station.
Wow. And the candidates do spend some money. There's a lot of chicken dinners that are bought for thousands of people in Samoa to garner votes, aren't there?
Quite a few, yeah. And the political season is always fun to watch.
Oh my goodness. So we're talking to Chris Tarr and Larry Fuss about some of the implications of broadcast rules. Started with David Oxenford talking about this topic and how elimination of Chevron deference from courts' decision-making process might bring up some rule changes. We have another topic to talk about that we're going to get to right after this commercial break, and that is the Form 395B. That puts some broadcasters bringing that back after 20 years of it not being here. That's put some broadcasters in a rather interesting situation, as I think Larry will explain. And that's coming up in just a minute. Our show is brought to you in part by Broadcasters General Store and by VoxPro.
Hey, what's happening? St. John here, coming to you from Command Central, and wanted to tell you about the absolute best partner you can have in radio. I'm talking about, boom, Wheatstone's VoxPro. Now, a lot of folks have used previous versions of VoxPro, all awesome, but I want to tell you about some of my favorite new features in 7. And for folks who've never used VoxPro before, I'm about to tell you why it's an absolute game changer and essential for really fast-paced multi-element radio. Lots of different audio software out there. Why VoxPro? because it was designed for radio. It's the only software designed to do what we needed to do, which is record, edit, playback in real time. When I say lightning fast, I'm going to show you how fast you can edit stuff up in Vox Pro right now. Literally 3 clicks on the controller, mark left, mark right, everything that gets marked, you hit delete, it goes away. It's literally that fast. So we're going to take this part right here. Boom, from caller 9 to him saying, I'm ready.
Ready for that secret sound.
Boom, all of that stuff, hit delete, it goes away. Here's your edit.
You are tackling secret sound caller 9. I'm ready, St. John.
So one of the best features of version 7, this is awesome. It's effects macros, and you can literally put a chain of effects together so that instead of having to normalize a phone bit and then use noise reduction on it and EQ it and all that, you can literally build a chain. One button, this one's called call right here. I just click that. All of those processes happen instantaneously. Literally saves 80% of your editing and cleanup time. Final thing that I love about Vox Pro, and there's so much more to get into, but one of my favorite things, you can load it on a laptop. I've literally done my show from a hotel room in Armenia to the conference room at, this was fun, jury duty. Great thing, no one could tell the difference. Vox Pro makes it totally easy. Telling you, if you're looking for the best on-air partner, call my friends at Wheatstone, ask them about Vox Pro, and you will be glad you did.
And actually, the place to buy Vox Pro is from Broadcasters General Store, BGS. The website is bgs.cc, or you can call them at 352-622-7700. Broadcasters General Store. They'll make you a fantastic deal on Vox Pro. Excuse me, or anything else that you need for your broadcast needs. So check it out. All right, we're about to finish up our show here. Chris Tarr is along, and David Oxenford was our first guest. Larry Fuss is along, too. We want to cover real quickly this Form 395B. Larry, you've been filling out, I think earlier it was Form 395A, wasn't it, 20 years ago?
I don't remember.
It was 20 years ago.
Yeah, the 20 years ago. I had more hair back then, too. The form was ruled unconstitutional 20 years ago.
Oh.
And so now they're bringing it back because I don't know what's changed. But you're required to identify all your employees, like David said, by race, gender, and ethnicity. Now, under federal law, you're not allowed to ask your employees their race or their gender or their ethnicity. So how do you fill out this form? You know, they expect you to just, go around and just assume what everybody is, which I guess is the only way to do it. But, it's just stupid.
Wow. What are you going to put down for me?
I'm just going to put undetermined for everybody.
Undetermined.
I'm not going to guess at it.
No, that is ridiculous. That was one of those. I could see the good intention there, but just it's just not. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, the whole. It's just like a lot of those regulations where, let's hire the best person for the job. Let's not have to have a scorecard about who we hire. Now I get the outreach. I understand, the EEO outreach kind of stuff. I think that's important. I think, and it's just good business to get your openings out everywhere. But to have to report back the composition of your staff, you don't do that to any other business really. And I don't think that it makes a lot of sense anymore. It's just like, I was watching a TV show last night, Canada Immigration, where in Canada, they don't require a work permit from an American if it's something that is special that the American can do that a Canadian person can't do. That same kind of thing. It's like, well, they recognize that, okay, maybe this American needs to come up here and do this because it's a job that is very special that someone who is Canadian can't do. I think that, just like with abolishing, a lot of the engineering rules with the FCC, I think it's come to the point where, let us make the decision on who the best candidate is. And I think we're past that now.
Well, why should the FCC even be involved in this? We already have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the federal government. So the FCC's EEO efforts are basically redundant. I mean, if somebody feels like they've been discriminated against, go file a complaint with the EEOC and let them deal with it.
Right. And I think that's, you're exactly right. I think there are avenues for that already. And I don't think that, and I think that in the past, I believe that the EEO rules with the FCC have also been abused at renewal time and some other things where, that's been used as kind of an attack vector on licensees that perhaps are taking taking positions, I want to say political positions or whatever that are unpopular. People can use that or try to use that EEO thing as a weapon, basically, to try to prevent renewals. So I think the FCC shouldn't be in the business of that.
Well, I've got a proposal for engineering, and Chris, you see if you agree with this. Instead of having some rules that are kind of like DEI rules for the engineering department, we should have CEL rules, and we should have reporting on compression, EQ, and limiting, and to make sure that gets reported we can even have that reported every day. We have audio processors that can report that every minute, compression, EQ, and limiting, so that everybody, we get stats on that.
Give me, the opportunity and the time to just change a bunch of FCC rules in it for a day. And I'll tell you what, things like legal IDs, what a stupid thing that is anymore. EEO, those sorts of things, gone. I'd get rid of them in a heartbeat.
Did you want to touch on disaster reporting, Kirk?
Oh, yes, please do. We have just a minute left. So, yes, tell me about disaster reporting.
The Commission's disaster information reporting system has been voluntary for years, but they're proposing to make it mandatory because in the middle of a hurricane or a tsunami or whatever we happen to be going through, we can certainly stop down and go on the FCC's website and fill out a form to tell them what we're doing. It's ridiculous. There's better things we could be spending our time doing in the midst of a disaster rather than filling out a form for the government.
Do you still have to fill out the form with the negative option? Like if you don't need anything? I know for a while that was one of the options. You had to file to say, "Oh, we're good."
Yeah. Well, most broadcasters are complaining that it's just more government time wasting paperwork. Give us something that we can use when there's a situation like that and we're off the air due to a storm. We need generators, we need fuel, we need assistance. We don't need to waste our time filling out forms.
Agree with you 100% on that one.
We'll have. I wasn't even aware of that, and we'll have a link to some of the pages at the FCC about DIRS, the Disaster Information Reporting System. We have to do that, Larry. Is that right?
Well, it's voluntary now, but they're proposing to make it mandatory because they say not enough stations are participating. Well, it's because we don't have time.
Right. I get almost a daily. I get a daily email from FEMA about that, and with DIRS activations and things like that. And yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Well, and then there's a requirement too that we're going to have to start reporting on foreign governments as the source of programming. Like one of our stations, in fact, is Black Gospel and runs a whole lot of paid programming from preachers. We're going to be required to get a form filled out from every one of those preachers that basically states they are not a representative of a foreign government. And I thought I had here it is. Here's the form. You have to fill this out for every program length commercial. And they're proposing to extend that as well to paid PSAs. For example, if the Rotary Club's having a pancake breakfast and they're buying time on your radio station to promote it, you're going to have somebody from the Rotary Club fill out this form certifying that they're not a member of a foreign government.
Wow. Well, we can tell the preachers on our Black Gospel station to complain to Benny Thompson about having to do that. Wow. Terrible, terrible, terrible. I can hear them now. I've lived in Indianola all my life. What do you mean foreign government?
Yeah, but it's. I think it goes into effect August 15th for program length stuff like preachers.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Well, okay, gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you very much for your participation. Chris, I haven't asked you for a tip of the week. Do you have any final comment before we have to go?
My only, it's not really a tip or even I guess a helpful comment, but a lot of these rules are made have good intentions. The problem is that they're good intentions based on a few edge cases of things. And it's like, instead of taking a surgeon's scalpel and carving out things for these situations, they just take a sledgehammer and smack it around. And they're all things that we all have to deal with. But I think that as time goes on, we do need to look at these rules and these and these forms and all these things that we have to do as broadcasters, and really take a look at why we're doing them. I think every once in a while, the FCC especially needs to take a good look at, what are we actually doing, and is there a good reason to do it anymore?
Yeah. What are we trying to accomplish here? Larry, you have a final comment on our way out?
Well, the government never met a form it didn't like, or a regulation it didn't like. And so, a lot of this new stuff, if you read the press releases, it says they were all adopted upon party lines. Well, which party is in control of the FCC right now? And keep that in mind on November 5th.
Well, I was kind of, I wasn't ready to be impressed by Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel, but, she's, anyway, got some transparency on the AI thing. So maybe there will be some common sense there. I don't know. Well, we live in exciting times always. It's never dull. It's always interesting. It always has been. There's always been, controversial things that government agencies are doing. And it just so happens that the FCC's doings tend to affect us in broadcasting. There's always something to like and always plenty to dislike if you're affected by those things. So, Larry Fuss, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And Chris Tarr, as usual, thank you very much for being here. Hey, next week, gentlemen, we're going to be live from the Alabama Broadcasters Association. I'll be speaking there Thursday morning, a week from today, and I'll be staying throughout the day for the engineering conference, and then we're going to bring in some guests on Thursday of next week. So that'll be cool. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to get a tour, we're going to talk about satellite network operations from Marcus O'Rourke, always a terrifically interesting character. And he's going to talk about the satellite network operations at Link Up. It's going to be pretty interesting. I think it's going to be great. Thanks a lot to Suncast for engineering today's show. Appreciate all your work, Suncast. And we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.